This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. If you're heading to RPM Chicagoland in Naperville, Illinois, October 10th through the 12th, be sure to stop by and see Steel Mill Modeler Supply and Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply in the vendor area. With models to fit steam, transition, and diesel eras on display, come see how they can help take the realism of your layout industries to the next level. For more info, check out their website at tullymodels.com. That's TULLY models.com. It's time for you to submit your answer for the question of the month, our new feature where you get to be heard on Around the Layout. Our question this month, how do electronics help tell the story of your layout? Go to aroundthelayout.com/question to give us your answer. Answers must be received by October 11th. So again, aroundthelayout.com/question. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. It's time once again for Talking Ops with Don Irace, and joining me live in the studio, Don Irace.
Hey, Ray, glad to be here. It's nice to see the studio for a change.
Yeah, it's definitely neat. It's been a learning experience a bit. We've only had a couple that have actually recorded here live in the studio. So we had to make a couple changes because we've got an awesome guest with us tonight. That would be the owner of the Canada Spokane and Pacific Railroad. That's Drew James. Drew, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Excited to be here.
Drew, glad to see you here.
Again, we got all the technology working. We can all see each other. Somehow I've been able to plug in the right wires and make the right connections and wrap the right electrical tape around things that need to be connected. So glad we're able to get together. It's been a while since we've had you on the podcast, and we got to learn about how you developed the layout for the Canada Spokane and Pacific Railroad. But then at the end, we disconnected. We ended the show, and you went, I didn't get to talk about ops. So here we are. It took us a full year to get around to this, and I hinted to you that something was coming, and then you probably at some point maybe even think that it wasn't coming at all. But we're here. And we're going to get everybody brought up to speed on how you develop the operations. And both the guys sitting here in the studio here have been able to operate that layout. And it's an absolutely fantastic one. So really excited to get to talk about it. But first, you just got done wrapping up your attendance at the NER convention. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your trip out to Rochester?
Yeah, the NER convention was in Rochester for the first time because the Lakeshores division used to be in a different region. And a few years back, they moved into the NER. So this was their first convention. And they really did a fantastic job. It was a great convention. It was very well attended. And the venue could not have been better at the RIT Conference Center. We had plenty of room and great food, and the rooms were good. And of course, there was, as Bill Brown said at the awards breakfast, he said, it's a great convention when you just have too many things to choose from. Yeah. So, you wanted to go to clinics, you wanted to look at layouts, you wanted to operate, you wanted to go on train excursions. And there was just too many things to choose from. But I really enjoyed myself, and everybody else seemed to be having a good time. I was able to host an op session on Thursday, late afternoon into the evening, for folks who were driving out to Rochester and were passing through Syracuse from the east. So that was a lot of fun. We had a good time at that session.
Good. I'm sorry I missed it.
Yeah, we missed you guys. So hopefully we'll see you in Concord next year.
I'll be there. We'll be in Concord. I'll see you. Well, I'll see you probably. I'll see you drop before that.
Definitely.
Be back up for that.
Yeah, that's unfortunately that NER convention for me falls right around the time I host a roller hockey tournament. And although the rink, if anybody has heard, me personally talk about this rink project, it's been pretty crazy, but it always seems to fall right on that same weekend. So hopefully we can shake it up. Maybe I just got to move the roller hockey tournament and just say, you know what, I got other things going on, guys. We're going to hold it on a different day. So
do something different.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
I'll tell you that I think that the regional conventions are just such a great bang for the buck. I love them. I went out to Long Beach this year, mostly to work at the convention. I didn't get to participate too much, but I'll tell you, I love the NER conventions. It's the right length of time. There's always great layouts and great people, and it's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, the NER conventions. I mean, we've been going to NER conventions for 14 years. I have anyway. And every one of them has just been as good as the next, good as the next. Never, ever, ever had a bad time at an NER convention. Not once. My kudos to all those guys that set all that stuff up. I mean, I've been everywhere. We've had them in Rhode Island. We've had them in Mass. We've had them up in New York. They've been all over the place. And we've never, ever had one that we could say, well, that wasn't that good. They're all good.
I only started going about 5 or 6 years ago when I retired, and I can't believe what I missed.
Well, I'll tell you what, for, you mentioned retiring, for somebody who's, in the workforce, still employed, that short format is a lot easier to digest too. When it's only, 2-3 days, that makes it a lot easier. Not you burning up all your vacation time. I mean, my vacation time should be designed to be taking the kids and the wife somewhere. So it allows, if I can take a day off or a day or two, that's a lot easier to make happen. Plus the affordability and everything else. And then the NER region itself, I mean, just phenomenal. I'm really proud to be a part of it, and Don's still a part of it. And just a lot of great things happening.
I mean, it's like I can say, they're perfect. There's always plenty to do. There's great layouts. There's always good clinics. And it's every one of them has always been perfect and put on properly, And like I said, the length of time is always good. And I've enjoyed them all. I hope they just keep it going.
If you just take a Friday off, you can participate in 95% of it.
Yeah, we got to start on Thursday. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So,
but for the working guy, that's great. You can get 2 or 3 days in, and that works out very well for a convention, and, action packed, really jammed with some really good activities. And like Don said, awesome layouts in the region to really make it great. Which kind of leads me to, they talk about the area in the Central New York division, which is part of the NER. And in the event that you guys host, the Ops to You Drop event in the April timeframe, is just another really well run event that we look to. And Don's been doing it for how long? You've been doing these the Ops to You Drop?
I've been doing Ops to You Drop for at least, time goes by so fast, 5 or 6 years anyway. I've been doing it. And I mean, and I moved to Florida, and I still come up to go to the Ops to You Drop. I just look forward to it every year. It's definitely worth the trip. I'm not looking for any trophies for being the farthest traveled. I just want to operate the layouts up there.
Well, Bill Braun does a great job of organizing that event every year. It's always one of my favorite weekends of the year. And this year, I believe we're going to have a couple of new layouts, so that'll be good.
Nice.
I know that Ed O'Rourke, who is the president of the NER, he started building a new layout about a year ago. He moved into a new house, and so his layout should be hosting op sessions. So there should be some new opportunities. And as a matter of fact, one of your guests, because I learned about him through your show, Bruce Ryan, he, I believe, is going to participate as well in the weekend. So it should be a good time as always. And Don, if you've been coming that long, you probably operated on the CS&P when it had 3 feet of scenery.
I think I've operated in your layout the last 3 times I was up there. It was. I don't remember you not having any scenery. It must have been. Maybe it hasn't been that long. I don't know. When you retire, time just travels, and you just get caught up.
I guess that would have been 2017 was the first time I opened up this layout for Ops to You Drop, and And we worked really hard to get some scenery on it. And there was actually 3 feet of scenery was all there was.
Oh.
And everything else was bare
Yeah.
bench work. But all the track was in and running. There was cardboard boxes for industries, but we were operating.
Yeah, that's all. There's nothing wrong with that. I've seen plenty of layouts like that. We operate on with cardboard. Sudro Brown up in Amherst there, he never had a stitch of scenery. All he had is cardboard cutouts for buildings and everything, but he had a big crew and operated trains, a lot of them too.
One of the piece of advice I always give to my friends as they're starting to build new layouts is I think it's important to, if you plan to operate, I think it's important to start operating earlier rather than later, in particular before you're totally covered in scenery. I know that, I started doing that in the CS&P and it really paid off dividends because sure enough, I learned that the yard throat wasn't correctly designed and needed to be ripped up and put down again. And there was track work that wasn't good and had to be fixed. And there was new industries to be added. And there was an awful lot of, I'm not going to say a dramatic amount, but certainly a non-trivial amount of changes that I made to the layout from the time we first started to operate to the time that, scenery was well underway. And it was a lot easier to make those changes when I wasn't ripping up scenery and plaster and ballast and all that.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I talk to people about when they're building new layouts and they talk about scenery. I'm like, if you're going to operate, get a crew of guys over here, operate it, prove the track, make sure it's what you want. Your tracks, your switches are where they're supposed to be. Everything is working and just run it. I mean, when I did my first layout, I operated for like 6 months before I started doing any scenery. And I didn't do it until everything was done. Everything was happy. Everybody was happy. There was no problems. And then the scenery stuff come out. And
Right.
even this layout, the same thing. I operated this layout for 6-7 months with the same crew of guys until we proved it. And it was what we wanted to do. And then I put all the scenery on it. And that's it. No more changes.
And, on the CS&P, one of the design aspects is that there's long single track runs between towns. So we started the scenery building really on those long, single track runs between towns where there was less apt to be any changes.
Right.
So once the track was proven to be, reliable, then we started scenery there and then progressed into the towns as they finally, stop changing the track configuration.
That's a good idea because if you want to get some color on your layout, like I said, those are the best places to start. Where you got a straight track, it's going from one point to another. You don't have to worry about pulling stuff up and changing stuff, and you make the best of both worlds. You get some scenery down, some color in the layout, and you move on from there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely good. The best track plan in the world still can be shaken out by some implementation and running stuff on it and checking it out for sure.
Yep.
For those that haven't checked it out, we'll put a link for the original show that we did. That'll be aroundthelayout.com/50. But for those that haven't heard it yet, why don't you just give us a quick summary of your railroad?
Okay. The Canada Spokane and Pacific is proto-freelanced railroad. It's June of 1978. It's jointly owned by Burlington Northern and Canadian Pacific. It's between Calgary and Spokane. It's a north-south oriented line. The layout itself, it's a fairly good-sized layout. It takes up about 1,500 square feet of my basement. There are 5 towns on the railroad with a long single track between them. It's got a double-ended staging yard that represents both Calgary and Spokane, depending on which direction you come into that yard or you're leaving that yard. It has a one major yard in Nelson, and that yard its primary purpose is to service the other towns with locals to build the locals that go out and service those towns. And it was definitely designed and built for operations. I had a layout in a previous house that was very similar in style. It was just about a third the size. So I did get to proof out a lot of concepts and kind of evolve my philosophy of what I wanted to do operations-wise on this layout.
So you had this layout that was, you mentioned, a third of the size of this one. What were some of the things that when you started to put the plan together for this new one, like the must-haves from that you didn't have on the smaller layout?
The main thing was I wanted to have long mainline runs. So I wanted crews to have a feel for traveling somewhere between towns. I did not want the engine entering one town as the caboose was leaving the previous town. And also it was designed so that it's generally you cannot see the next town that you're going to be traveling to. So that also gives it a distance, a feel of having traveled a distance. So those were the primary goals that I had. I wanted a single track main line. I knew at some point I wanted a CTC machine. So, that was a goal as well.
Tell us about the CTC machine, because I've seen that CTC machine. I think it's unbelievable. So,
well, let me talk to you a little bit about traffic control then, and what we do on the layout. And it is CTC, and I don't have a lot of experience with timetable and train order. I've operated a little bit using kind of, I'll say very timetable and train order light, not really the full method. And I've also operated with track warrants on a layout or two. And I kind of reached the conclusion the CTC made the most sense. And the reason is several things. One is it's easy for guests to understand. So I knew that on the CS&P, I would be hosting, I hope to host, and it's worked out that way, a lot of guests coming in from out of town to participate in op sessions. It can be tough to try to teach them timetable and train order. But CTC is fairly straightforward. You can teach them the basics. What's the saying? If it isn't all red, there's no red, right? So
Right.
you can you can quickly get them to understand how to follow the signals. And the other aspect of it is that I think most model railroads, our traffic density is way higher than the prototype.
Right.
So I'm modeling, this single track secondary route up in the Pacific Northwest, and I run 21 trains a day. So that's unrealistic. That's way more traffic than you would expect.
Yeah.
But because our main lines are all too short, even on a layout, the size of mine or your old one, Don, you have a lot of traffic density. And CTC is the easiest way to get through all that, to run all those trains without, when I've run using track warrants, for example, I was spending so much time doing paperwork, I couldn't get the train over the road, if you will. So I kind of settled on CTC as being what made the most sense. And then, as I mentioned in the last episode, I saw some CTC machines. Kevin Daly has an amazing one on his C&O layout. I saw that in 2018. There's a gentleman by the name of Doug Geiger who does clinics at National on CTC, and he actually has a refurbished machine, which I got to see out in Colorado actually a year ago. And, then the one, the Colorado Model Railroad Museum. So I saw some CTC machines. I never really knew how they worked, but I was like, I got to have one. And so Ken Cameron, Dave Martini, and myself, we, during the pandemic, we decided it was time to build it. And we had implemented it, or Ken, I'll say, had implemented it on JMRI. So we had a virtual machine that we ran for several years, and it was changing all the time. And then once it finally settled down and we went almost a year without changing the virtual machine anymore, we decided it was time we could, implement it in hardware. So that's how that machine came about. And, I love it. I've actually never dispatched using it, believe it or not.
That's funny.
But I have more and more we actually, give certificates to our certified dispatchers. And I think I have, let me see, four now, including a 15-year-old.
That's nice.
So,
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, he's one of my best dispatchers.
Yep, nothing wrong with that at all. Get him young.
Yeah.
getting back to the timetable stuff, I'm like, I agree with you. I've operated on plenty of layouts that have timetable operation, and I got to say that with people that never done it, and you got a bunch of them in the room, the timetable never works out. By the end of the night, the railroad's a total mess, and nothing's where it's supposed to be. But anytime I've operated on a CTC type system, everything is going as planned. And I agree, to try to teach people who have never operated with timetables in one night, or the first 20 minutes when you're giving your speech in the beginning of the op session, it's very hard to pick up, because you, especially if you got what is it, the clock, the fast clock, they throw that in there. And now everybody sees the clock. Well, you're supposed to leave at this time, and you don't leave, or you leave too late, and now you got to be somewhere, and you look at it, well, I got to be there in like 5 minutes, and in your head, what 5 minutes is compared to what the time clock is counting down. Right. It's tough to get there, and then everything just away. It's like, forget it.
It's kind of like I've talked about it before with levels of operating. You get like beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and the timetable train order seems to be on that advanced level, right? Yeah, it's not something you want to have the first operating experience with. You want to really be on a CTC, or maybe even something without control, or very simplified, to be able to start to learn the theory of operations, then work your way towards those kinds of things.
The train order part's good, because when your dispatch is given a train order on a warrant, so
right,
there's really not a lot of pressure in there for the operator. You're gonna listen to the dispatch. You're gonna copy down what he says onto your order, and you're gonna go do your work. There's no clocks. There's none of this stuff. There's no time. You start putting times in there, and that just makes everybody go crazy. Like, oh, I gotta be here now. I gotta be. I didn't sign up for this. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I totally agree that my layouts would have never made it with timetable operations, and I did think about it in the beginning, but I quickly changed my mind to CTC.
So interestingly, at the NER convention, Steve King gave a 2-hour clinic, and he's one of the experts in this area. He's written lots of articles and books, and so I was in that clinic along with a couple of my regular operators, and we had a lot of discussion about it afterwards, because I actually would like to get to where I do run an occasional timetable and train order session with a handful of my regulars. If I can get a group of guys who really want to learn it, I would run a lot fewer trains, and we think that would be a fun thing to do on occasion. But I'm definitely ways from getting there yet. But it's one of those things that's on my to-do list, out in the future. If we're ever starting to get bored with the current operations or whatever, we'll try to implement some timetable and train order.
Yeah, I agree, because if you have a crew that you normally have at your layout week after week or month after month, and those guys get used to doing timetable operations, things will go much smoother, because they understand it. And then the more they do it, the more they understand it, and the better it gets. But like I said, you bring a group of new guys in to try to do that with, you're never going to pull it off. I've never seen it pulled off in all the layouts I operated like that.
Another area that I learned a lot from my old layout was in the car forwarding area. So we use switch lists on the CS&P, but that, although I guess it's always been the case on this version of the CS&P, on my previous version, I actually started out with car cards and waybills. And there was a lot of things that I liked about the car cards and waybills. The main thing I liked about them was that you really had this feel that the cars were moving in rational ways, that there was a rational reason why this car is in that industry. But the problem is that the operators didn't seem to really notice that or care too much about it. They just wanted to know, where does this car need to go? And so some of my operators that definitely would fumble around with the car cards, and they would get dropped, or
take
just
them
to
home.
try to Yeah, taken home. I definitely had people
They're
call
not
me
souvenirs. No,
About 3 days later, you get an envelope in the mail with your car cards in it.
Yeah, I had people next time I saw them and say, "Hey, I found 2 car cards in my pocket." And so what I started to do on that layout was I actually still used the car cards and waybills that are out on the layout, but I didn't have my crews handle them at all. I just made switch lists prior to the operating session based on those car cards and waybills, and then and then I gave the crews a switch list. On the new CSMP, I never went down that path because I thought it was going to be too much work, and so I just started with switch lists from the get go, which is I prefer, and also my crews prefer the switch list as well. As they'll tell me, they'll say, "Look, when they're out there on the prototype moving cars around, they don't care where it came from or where it's going. They just want to know, what am I supposed to do with this car? Where does it go?" So I've been using switch lists, and I keep revising them. And what I have, I actually have played around a little bit with some of the software programs. I've played around with JMRI Ops, and I've played around with what's it called, Ship It,
Right.
Several years ago. And where I ended up, it's not ideal, but it works for me. I just have a big spreadsheet of every single car that I have in service. So there's about 300 and something cars, 350 cars. And every car, I have a 6-day op session, 6-day sequence, if you will. And this big spreadsheet tells me where every car goes for those 6 cycles. And then the 6th cycle, the car ends up back again where it needed to be for the first cycle. So, and then I print out my switch list from that huge spreadsheet. And so far, I think the 6 days is enough so the operators aren't noticing the same car going to the same place, because it only happens 6 op sessions later,
Right.
which is, probably 5 or 6 months later. And it does give me a lot of control, which is what I like compared to the software I was trying to use. It gives me a lot of control of what cars are going to be on what trains, and making sure that there's not going to be, too many cars trying to get into a siding, into a spur, an industry spur. So that's kind of where I've landed. But it was a bear to set up. And let me see, I just got a new car in the mail today, and just to add a new car into the spreadsheet, it takes me a good 20 or 30 minutes just to update all the switch lists and everything that needs to be updated when I add a new car. I can spend a couple hours when I get back from like Springfield and I have a bunch of new cars.
So you don't take a car off the layout and replace it with another car? Would you do that?
That's the easiest situation.
That's what I do.
Yeah, I generally am doing that now because I have about the right number of cars, but sometimes I'm not doing that. But you're right. And when I have a new box car and I'm just taking an old one off that doesn't meet the standards anymore, so to speak, then it doesn't take that long. I can do that in 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah. See, I went on a roll. I bought a bunch of home shop cars, high cube box cars for my paper mill. So what I did is I just got the cars, I weathered them, I put them on a layout, but I pull one of the Atom blue box cars off and throw it in a box, because I don't want it. I don't want any more cars on my layout than I have. That's it. And I'm the same with you. I started off with the car cards on this new layout too, and I immediately went to switch list, because I found that the switch list is more for me to control. And I just do an Excel spreadsheet, and it works out fine for me. It takes me not even like a half an hour, 3/4 an hour to redo the switch list, print them all out, and I'm all ready to go for the next op session. But I don't miss the car cards. I don't mix the boxes on the side of the layouts. I don't miss none of that stuff. I never seen a prototype building with a car card box on it.
Yeah, well, the car card box is supposed to be the prototype pocket, isn't it? Like that's the pocket of the conductor, right? And coming from somebody, I'll speak on behalf of the guy with the super small layout. For me, like if I add another car to any of my trains, I've completely goofed all my logistics because I have no room for expansion. And that's one thing, that if you're able to consider, if you have that room, or don't run everything to 100% capacity, give yourself a little bit of room to grow, or a little bit of expansion room, like yards. Like my yard, there's no room. There's no more cars in the Plainfield yard. Like if you added another car, it's going to be jamming something up, or it's going to be sitting on the grade crossing. So again, it's what you're talking about there. If you have a layout where you're able to have that little bit of, just give yourself some cushion. And I wish I would have been able to give myself a little bit more cushion and not just jammed up all the logistics. And then the other point I wanted to hit, and it's kind of like that battle, right? Car cards and waybills versus switch lists. And I've used both, and I think there's benefits to both. And the benefit I feel for car cards and waybills goes back to your point of the operators really don't care. Like, it's like all the research I've done, all the logistical things I figured out. Okay, I know that gaff shingles come from this place and they're going here and there, and I've got all that detail. And Don comes over and he goes, I don't care. I'm just moving, just tell me where that car goes. Right. So, it's funny. It's really about you. I mean, because the operators, they don't notice the things you think they notice, and they're not paying attention to those details. And honestly, they don't care. They just want to be able to operate it. Good operators want to operate it the way you want it operated. But all that little inside baseball stuff is really only important to you. And I think you've kind of hit on that with what you were saying earlier.
Well, right. They don't notice. I can remember when I was making my waybills up, and I had these, and I had an atlas spread out in front of me with maps, trying to come up with new places and doing research. And at the end of the day, all they wanted to know was, where does this boxcar go?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're lucky, because I got 3 rotations. You got 6. And even at 3 rotations, my guys would never realize they spotted that car there 3 weeks ago. They just don't. They're oblivious to that. You know what I mean? They're in the moment of what they're doing now. That in their mind, what they did last week doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So I totally agree with that.
I just took some time to update my switch list, and I had been thinking about that. I'm spending, we've all been spending a lot of money on sound engines, and I have all these beautiful sound engines, and I noticed my operators were rarely, they had the sound on, but they were rarely using any of the other functions that are coming with, engines now with sound decoders. And so I updated all my switch lists to add in all the function keys, because my engines don't change what trains they're assigned to. So I can now give them a switch list for a train, and I've added on that switch list all the function keys for the engine. I had tried to paper clip it onto the side of the switch list, and those paper clips were getting in the way of everything. So I just kind of redesigned my switch list to add all the function keys. So that's a benefit I have of my engines pretty much running the same engines on the same trains every session.
I put that function thing on the back of the throttle. I made a little paper. It's listed right on the back of the throttle. So all I have to do is turn the throttle around, tells them everything they need to know.
But that's tough, because a lot of them are the engines. I guess you're probably function mapping, right? So that it's always the same keys for the same. Like exactly. I just got a couple of new Rapido engines in, and there's probably 18 function keys.
The factory decoders are hard, because they have it set up the way they want it set up when they deliver it to you. And you're right, because I've had a couple of people buy a factory locomotive, and they've for some reason made changes to it, messed it up, and then they just go back to say ESU for instance, and they just download a locomotive prime mover. But the problem is, if they don't go into the factory settings of that decoder, where the files for the factory ones are, they lose all their lighting effects and everything.
Yeah.
So it's tough. So
another thing I wanted to bring up that I do that I think is a little bit different on the CSMP. Ray brought up yards, and the yard on the CSMP. So I really wanted the yard job to not be a stressful job for guests. I wanted guests to be able to come in and run the yard without being, and really have enjoyed the session and not felt like they were just overwhelmed. So what I do in the yard, I think, is a little bit unique in that if a car comes into the yard in that session, it's going to still be in the yard at the end of the session. So every car that's needed for the yard operators to make up the trains for that day are actually in the yard at the beginning of the session.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have a big enough yard to be able to do that. And so that means that if a train is late getting in and they were supposed to get cars off of it, they don't all of a sudden fall behind because, they couldn't get out train A. They couldn't get out train B until train A came in, and train A got delayed, and now they're behind, and they're stressed out,
freaking out.
Yeah, and so every car, if this is 98% true. There's a couple of cars they have to make connections during the app session, but for the most part they don't. And so it's just, so I really want my operators to have a good time. I don't want them to be real stressed out. The other thing that I'm able to tell them in the yard is for all the incoming cars coming off the trains they deal with during an app session, I always tell them, if you don't get those cars blocked onto the right tracks for the next app session, it's okay. It's okay. I'll just have to do some restaging in between. So focus on getting the trains out on time, and you have all those cars all ready to go. And the incoming cars, if you can get them blocked correctly for the next session, that's great. And I'll say this, almost all of them do. But I think it takes some stress off of them knowing that, hey, if that work doesn't get done, the session will move along. It won't be held up. So, I want them to enjoy themselves, because I've worked in yards and op sessions where, I'm halfway through the session before I've really figured out what's going on in the yard. And now I'm way behind, and it can be very, stressful instead of the fun job that you're trying to make it.
All right. Did you ever have an op session, but you didn't have to do any type of restaging at all after it was over?
Never. I'm going to take that. I'm going to say, no. I take that back, because now I understand what you're asking. I have to do a lot of staging between op sessions.
Right.
However, I actually, the first thing I do when I'm restaging is I do what I call the QA check, where I go around and check to see if every car that's on the layout, as opposed to ones that are in staging, if every car that's on the layout is in the right place.
Right.
And I would say it's happening more and more. As a matter of fact, I sent out a note to everybody who operated during the NER and said that I did not find a single car out of place. Every car in the yard and every car in every industry and every town was exactly where it was supposed to be. Good. That was surprising to me, because only one or two people had ever operated here before, and those that had, well, the guy in the yard, Ed O'Connell, knew what he was doing. So he's operated here several times.
That's a good man.
But outside of Ed, there were guys that had never operated here, or it had been years ago when they had operated. So I was impressed.
The last time I operated over there, I didn't get a progress report, so I'm kind of wondering. But I want to go back, because you made a great point, and this is exactly what I found, and this is why I really enjoy going and operating your layout, Drew, is that you have that mentality that you want a challenging operating session, you want it, but enjoyable, and not where you're banging your head against the wall, or you're stressing, or it feels like work. Like, and I found that, like, I've switched 3 of your areas. I've switched Nelson, Castlegar, and Kettle Falls. Now I've done those 3 jobs. And what I like about what you've done is you leave, it's not like there's only just enough room and it has this magic recipe that has to be a certain way. Like, you give some margin. And that is enjoyable, because it's not, oh, well, I have to make exactly this move to make this happen. It definitely makes it a lot more enjoyable. And then you have that mentality, and it's great.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way when you've operated here, because it's definitely a goal. So it's definitely trying for people to enjoy themselves and not feel like it was stressful, or not feel like, hey, I made a fool of myself because I couldn't get this job done, so, or I screwed it all up. So, it's about having fun. And, when I built this railroad, I definitely built it. And I know that that's not always the case. Some people build a layout and they know it's going to be like the same set of guys are going to operate there, every other week. And on the CSMP, it's yes, I have a set of, I'm going to call it 15 regulars that operate here fairly often. But I have, I probably have 50 people on my invite list of folks who are, local or fairly local, and they don't get to operate here that often. And then, I host events for out of town guests who are coming in it's the only time they'll ever
Right.
operate on it. And so you want them to have a good time.
Absolutely. I know that all the times I've operated there, and I've probably operated almost those 3 jobs that you operated, and I've done some through trains and stuff, but I've always had a good time. Everything has always ran good. There was never problems with anything, no locomotive problems, no car derailments, none of that stuff. And if it was self-inflicted. But it's, I mean, you can't take that factor out of it. There's a lot of self-infliction that goes on when you're operating. Not always the layout's fault. But I always had a good time. It's a perfect operation as far as I'm concerned. I mean, all those layouts up there have all been great. I mean, I've enjoyed operating on all of them up in the Syracuse area.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I always wonder. It's like I got to move up to Syracuse.
Yeah,
I mean, there's just you got such a great group up there.
I went the wrong way.
Yeah. Well, I think you were trying to get away from snow. If you're trying to get away from snow, that would be the wrong
Syracuse
direction to travel.
But
yeah,
We only get about 10 feet a year.
only. Yeah.
Let's get on the subject of the why.
The why.
Which why? WYE why?
The track why.
The track why? Yeah.
All right. Yes. So there is a why on my layout. Why there's a why, I do not know.
Maybe that would be the title of this episode.
no
Why
kidding.
is there a why? That might be the winner. Yeah.
So when I designed the layout, there was a place between what we call the Nelson Industrial Area and the Nelson Yard that a Y was kind of a natural fit. And so back when I was designing it, it was sort of like, yeah, I'll put a Y here. And I thought, oh, maybe there'll be a train that comes out of that industrial area. I wasn't really sure what it was going to be used for. And as the operation has evolved, it's turned out that we've never used the Y. There's nothing that needs to be turned in the course of an op session. And so it's never been used. And as a matter of fact, one of the leg that is never used of that Y, one leg is the entry into the industrial area. The other leg is the main line. And the third leg, I scenicked so that it looks like it's never used. It's got weeds growing between the track. I decided, hey, it's never get used, so it ought to look that way. And so sure enough, I'm listening to Tim Garland's episode that you just had him on recently. And he talked about on the prototype of that occasionally you get a car that has to be unloaded on a particular side. And so I heard that and the light bulb went off in my head. So now I have a use for this Y. So I don't know if any of my regulars who be coming to my next op session will be listening to this or when this episode will come out. But whoever gets the Nelson switch job is going to be surprised, or maybe not surprised if they've heard this episode, that there's going to be a note on the switch list that's going to tell them that a particular boxcar has to be a particular side to the loading dock in one of the industries. And we'll see how that goes over. I have a feeling that the operator of the Nelson switch job will think that's great and won't have a problem with it. The dispatcher might not be very happy because normally a train goes into the industrial area and it kind of disappears off his board for quite a while and he doesn't have to think about it. And all of a sudden that guy's going to be calling them up saying, hey, I need to use the main line to turn this boxcar.
It's going to be fun, though. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun, and you ought to set up a camera and record the first guy to do it, right? Because, we were talking with Tim, and he was talking about how many guys accidentally, they'll end up Ying the engine. The engine will be facing the wrong way, but the boxcar never changed. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it and how they figure out, okay, I got to get this boxcar to the opposite side. So, yeah, set up a camera there, and then maybe we'll put a little Benny Hill music behind it as they try to get this figured out.
Since my last op session was all guests, this one coming up is pretty much going to be all regulars. So to be honest, I won't mind if they have a little stress or a little,
That's going to be cool, because not a lot of railroads have that option. I'd like to do it, but I just don't have a room to put a Y in, so it's not going to happen on my layout. So these guys better make sure they be able to unload boxcars on both sides.
How much room does that Y take up?
It doesn't take up that much room. It's a small Y. It can only handle, I was going to say it can only handle an engine and a car in each leg, but it's probably only 4 square feet or something like that. It's not that. It depends on what you include in the Y, right? Because one end kind of goes into the yard, the other end's a main line, and the third is the lead into the industrial area.
So have you sent the MOW crew out there yet to clear all the grass and the weeds and everything and the stumps and the trees growing in that track?
So just to continue this story, before the op session at the NER, I had an open house, and there was a good period of time when there was nobody in the basement besides myself and one of my buddies, Ed Oshesky, who was helping me with the open house. And so I said, I told him I was going to do this with the Y. And I said, I'm pretty sure I wired it up. I think I put an auto reverser under there, but nothing has gone through it in so long that I'm not sure. So we did run an engine around the Y. So I do know that there was an auto reverser installed, and there actually is power to it, because it had been 5 years since anything had gone down that one side of the Y. So yeah, I wasn't even certain that the auto reverser was still installed or if I'd pulled it out or what.
That's gonna be cool. They're gonna enjoy that. It's different, It's something way different than they're used to.
Yeah, it definitely will be something.
That could be the next favorite job on that railroad. You know what I mean? Doing that job. Wow, we get to turn that car around.
Well, speaking of that, I think I've been interested how things have evolved. When I first started operating the railroad, a lot of my regulars really wanted to run through trains, or they wanted to run something over the main line. And I had a lot of through trains scheduled, and they were very popular. And over time, what I'm seeing is my crews definitely want to do more switching. And the jobs that are popular, the Kettle Falls job that you did, Ray, the last time you were here, is definitely the most popular job, I would say. But they want to run those turns. They want to run Northport and Castlegar and the Nelson Switch job. Those are very popular. I have a few guys that always want to run the yard, and the road crews. People are still happy to do them, but they're definitely less popular than they had been before. And as a result, I've been having to change my train lineups a little bit and what the different trains do. So now almost all my mainline trains do something. I used to have, I think I only have a through freight in each direction that really doesn't do any switching at all, one in each direction. But I used to have several, and now I've managed to at least provide some work on pretty much every mainline train. Because just to provide a little bit more interest to the operators.
Yeah, you mostly get guys like visitors that come, like during conventions and stuff like that to do. A lot of guys just do through trains because they're not really sure. They're afraid to do the switching, so they rather just run the through trains through. But you're right. Irregular operators, even with me, we don't have any through trains really. The only through train I have is actually the interchange train. It runs between Worcester and Valley Falls, and it switches on the way up and it switches on the way back. It still does something. So basically, I have all switching jobs. I don't have any through trains at all.
Well, I think that mentality changes too. And here's somebody, hasn't been operating for as long as you two gentlemen have. I think part of running that go to the through train, it's harder to mess up a through train than it is a switch job, right? As long as it's with CTC, if you follow the signals, you can't really mess up a through train. And there's other layouts. And that's why I think it's great, your mentality with switching and how you've got your operations set up with a little bit of ease and more about aimed on fun, because there are other guys out there that don't quite have that. And you feel obligated to make sure you get it exactly. And you get that nervous feeling. But as you get comfortable with a layout owner, then you can start to understand, and it gets you a little bit where, okay, if I mess up, I'm not going to get kicked out, or I'm not going to be invited back again. They're going to laugh with you. And, I think that's a true thing. I think, there's some anxiety to going to somebody's layout for the first time, or even the second or third time, and making sure that you're doing it right so that you continue to get invited back.
Although I wouldn't necessarily say the guys running the two trains couldn't mess up, because if they're talking to somebody, blow through a red light, the dispatch is not.
That's true. It's a little harder. I mean, you got to really work hard to mess it up. Like if you learned when you were 16 years old that red is stop and green is go. I mean, hopefully that you've been able to retain that.
Then you turn around, he turns around and see the signal. Oh, was that thing green or was it red when I went through it?
Although there are videos, there's a video of me online of me going through a red signal on our good old friend Joe Grissetti's layout. Of course, that signal was facing east-west and I was looking north-south, so you couldn't even see it. But
that happens.
It can be done, no doubt. I can do it.
That is not an uncommon thing, Don. So I'm laughing where somebody will pull through the signal, and of course, as soon as they get on the OS section, on the OS section, the signal turns red, and now they're not sure, was that signal red before I pulled up or not? And now it's they're like, oh, it was red, and it's like, well, it was red because
I think I just back up,
and then they back, they get all it's like. Sometimes.
Then a dispatcher starts yelling, "What the heck's going on over there?"
Yeah. It definitely happens. But speaking of mainline trains and switching and all that, one of the things that I've, I don't want to say struggle, but I keep trying to refine and make better, and it's such a big compromise, is that the local turns and where there's a lot of switching and in the yard, that all wants to be slowed down. It all wants to be slowed down. I mean, I'd love for those guys to have proto throttles and really take their time and figure out where the brakeman would be, all the things that you talk about, Ray, like on your smaller, switching layouts. The problem with that is if I slow that all way down, then the issue gets to be that the mainline trains and the other trains, it's hard to slow them down to the same amount. And if I slow down the fast clock, like I used to run a 6-to-1, then I slowed it to 4-to-1, and actually I've kind of compromised. Now I run 5-to-1, because as I would kind of like to have, I like the slower fast clocks to give people more time to do their jobs. But what that resulted in was crews having too long of a time between trains. So people were sitting, if you're running mainline trains, people are sitting around waiting for their next train to go. And so I've tried to, find a compromise between what I think are almost two competing aspects, where the crews who are running mainline trains, I want them to not be spending too much time waiting between trains, but I want to give the locals, plenty of time to not have to rush. So that's been something that I've continued to tweak a lot over the years. And sometimes it depends on, who my crews are, but it's something that I tweak, and I'll probably continue to tweak.
I mean, like I said, I've operated your layout, and I've sat in the crew office waiting for my next job. And to be honest with you, I kind of like a little bit of a break. You get to sit down, get off your feet, and then the older you get, the better you like it. You know what I mean? Because everything starts hurting your feet mostly, and you get, you always have refreshments. You grab something to eat, something to drink. Because I don't like people bringing drink and food on my layout. I don't allow none of that in the layout room at all. You know what I mean? So you got a good idea, and I think what you're doing is fine. It's not a long wait, you know, and it kind of clears your mind from what you did, and then think about your next job and what you're going to do. So I think you're fine. I wouldn't adjust it at all.
And what I also like, and I mentioned this to you, Drew, is that, you know, that social aspect of it as well with the crew lounge. I found in the times that I've operated, you don't go in, you sit there. It's usually not the same people twice. So at least you get to sit with somebody else. You get a little bit of chat, get to introduce yourself. So, you know, I love that social aspect of it. And you've got a great setup, you know, with that crew lounge right outside the layout room. And I think we missed, you know, one of the things that's great about, another thing that's great about your layout is the room that it's in. You have the way it's set up. You can't see the entire layout from one spot.
Right.
And it gives you that illusion of even bigger size. I mean, it's a nice size layout, but it gives it an illusion of even bigger because you're not seeing 150 scale miles ahead. You only see really the areas that you're working in, which is really a cool effect.
Then you go down a little aisleway, and then you go around the corner. There's like a whole nother room of layout in there.
Yeah.
You know, like, wow, where did this come from? You know, it's perfect. I tell you, I mean, you do a good job. I've really enjoyed myself. I'd love to come back more, but I don't see anything really you need to change, buddy.
Well, we're always.
Do you feel that way, Drew? Do you feel that way, that you've mastered it?
You know, yes and no. I mean, I feel really good about the way the op sessions go, and I feel as though my guests all have a good time. But there's no big but there. The only thing is, I do want to keep my regulars interested. So trying to, you know, do new things every once in a while so that, you know, 10 years from now, I can't be running the same trains and doing the same thing. So that is on my mind, which, you know, goes back to the timetable and train order discussion we had. And it goes back to these little things like the Y that's going to show up, you know, to change a boxcar. One of the things I did in the last year was I added a customs check for the passenger trains when they cross the border between Canada and the United States. They have to pull a random card out and see how long the custom check is going to be. I could see adding other things in where there's, you know, maybe there's, you know, I don't know, a maintenance away crew out there that, you know, with slow orders. And so I'm always looking for new things I can kind of throw in there that will change it up a little bit so that it's not the same old for, you know, for my regulars.
Now, may I have one more question? When your regulars come, how often are they allowed to do the same job over again? Do you space it out so they keep familiar with every job you have on the layout?
Are they allowed? So the way that I assign jobs and is, you know, I ask people when they're coming to tell me what job they would like to have. And so if there's no conflicts, I'll give them the job. If there are conflicts, I often will, you know, say, well, I can't give you Kettle Falls. I gave that to somebody else. So I'm going to give you the Castle Guard turn, which is, you know, another good switching job.
Only fair.
Yeah. So that's not an issue. The only real issue I have is dispatching, to be honest. It takes a little bit to get up to speed to become a dispatcher. And then the issue is that once you become, you know, I'll say, you know, qualified or, you know, competent on the machine and know what you're doing and understand what trains need to go out before other trains or it causes problems and all that. It's hard if you then go 6 or 8 months and don't do that job again. And so I have a number of people, including yours truly, me, who would like to dispatch. But it's hard to get people time in that seat, in the hot seat, so to speak, so that they can competently do it. And if you're giving them a lot of time so that they can competently do it, the other people who have learned, now they're going a long period of time without getting a refresh. So that's probably the position that struggles the right word, I wish I could, do something there, but there's going to get to be a limit of the number of dispatchers I can really have.
Yeah, that's got to be a hard balance, right? To try to keep guys that are fresh, and then they're not available, so you got to have somebody that can do it. If you're holding an ops session, so you got to have a backup. But yeah, again, and I'm looking at, I have a picture of the CTC panel up on my monitor here, and we'll share that on the link for the show here, or on the page for the show. And there's a lot going on there. There's a lot to watch. There's a lot to. So yeah, I would imagine if you haven't done it in a while, you probably sit in front of it and have to think for a little bit.
Yeah, it's not, like I just gave a clinic on how to use the machine at the NER convention. And, so I tell you that I gave a clinic on how it works. And at the same time, I've never actually dispatched my own layout. And I have dispatched because it's been a little while, but I used to, and I need to start it again. I used to have some kind of training sessions where I would just get maybe 3 or 4 guys to come over, and we would just run trains, not use a switch list or anything. We just run trains around while we took turns actually dispatching and lining up, setting up the routes and everything. And what I learned from that, sitting in the chair there, is, it's easy to get 1 train over the railroad. It's not too hard to get 2 trains in opposite direction to have a meet and get over the railroad. But as soon as you start having 3, let alone 4 trains out on the main line, it's all of a sudden what seems very simple and straightforward becomes very convoluted. And, becomes a very challenging situation.
I don't have that problem with mine because I got a remote dispatcher, so there's no fighting going on about that.
Yeah, he can hit mute and grumble under his breath back then. You don't have anybody. Yeah. With your dispatch, I know one of the gentlemen, I apologize, I don't remember his name, but yeah, you could tell he was getting a little maybe cranky. Yeah, just slightly cranky in there. When the big thing, I guess, and this is the same thing Don does when he's dispatching Mark's, the pet peeve of push the button, wait a second, then start talking, then let up on the button. It's like just simple radio. Maybe that'd be a clinic that needs to be held. How to use a radio, because it is a pain when you get cut off and can't hear what people are saying.
And it happens every time too. So
it definitely happens every time. And sometimes I have to walk, the other thing that happens, I'll have to walk around and go. So one of the things that's happened with the radios in the last year, another kind of upgrade, is I upgraded all the radios. I replaced all my old ones with new ones. And I also now have headsets for all the crews. And my crews like that, and I like it because it cuts down on the noise in the train room. So, and you're not getting the feedback that you would get before. But it does result in some funny situations where it's like the dispatcher will tell me, hey, so-and-so, their radio's not working or whatever. And so I walk over to where that person is, and I have to put the microphone down in front of their mouth because it's sticking up in the air like an antenna.
It's amazing how that works, isn't it? Yeah, the sound comes from the mouth. Yeah. It doesn't come from anywhere else. Yeah.
But some guys too, they get so concentrated what they're doing. You call them on the radio and they just don't even answer you. It's like, send somebody, tell him to answer the radio, please.
Somebody go tap him on the shoulder. Yeah. Wake him up.
It does happen.
Sure. It's all in fun. All in fun.
Yeah. For sure. And fun is exactly what the Canada Spokane and Pacific is when you operate it. And it's been a blast having you here, Drew, to talk about the CS&P, and we finally crossed that line. I went back and looked. It was July 4th that episode came out, so it's been well over a year. Yep. You've been more than patient, and it was. I hope everybody will think it was well worth it to wait for Drew to give the rundown on his ops. And you ever find yourself out in that central New York area and you have an opportunity, this is one of the great layouts to go check out. So
absolutely.
So, Drew, thank you so much for coming by and spending time with us tonight.
Thank you, Drew. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social, and send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.